welcome to this press conference called by the Alliance for Change for November 1, 2024. There are a number of issues that we will be addressing at today's press conference. And when I say we, I speak for myself and to my right, the Vice Chairman of the Alliance for Change, Mr. Michael Carrington. To my immediate left, the leader of the party, Nigel Hughes, followed by former leader of the party, Kemraj RANJATTAN. If I may take the prerogative of having the opportunity to moderate this press conference and start with my statement, where the Alliance for Change, we amplify our call for an improved electoral system ahead of the 2025 general and regional elections. Given what the PPP has said in the past for an improved electoral system, AFC is expecting the following changes ahead of the 2025 polls. 1, a new voters list. 2, the use of biometric voter identification at the place of poll. 3, electronic voting. We note that these are systems already called for and identified by the PPP as necessary for free and fair elections. And the systems they said they would pursue, as we hear in this video clip.
We need enhanced biometrics, because when some presiding officers said, like we had some cases in Victoria, this is Mr. X, just looking at the photo, and the polling agent from the party sits across the room or is in a hostile area, is afraid to object. They allowed a number of people to vote who should not have voted. But if you have biometrics, enhanced biometrics outside of just a photo ID, it could minimize that happening. We are going to push for electronic voting. Now, you have a system where you can do both. You can vote in the machine, and then it gives you, when you finish voting with the machine with enhanced biometrics, it emits a small paper which shows a ballot, which shows how you have voted, which you can then, like some systems have this method, which you can then put in the ballot box. So you have both systems. You can only access the voting through enhanced biometrics, like an iris scan, but you safeguard against presiding officers or anyone else acting capriciously and giving extra ballots out to people. But it's a dual system. It's both electronic and manual. That is paper trail.
Yes.
So we're going to be pushing for that. We have to ensure a fair system of hiring in Gcom, a fair system of hiring people, and that people who are affiliated with political parties do not work in Gcom, who have been openly partisan.
That was Barry Jagdeo making a call for the very things that the Alliance for Change has been calling for. We remind the PPP General Secretary of his statement. If those systems were being argued for then, the argument is even stronger now. Moreover, Guyana is now better placed with the financial resources to implement biometric identification and electronic voting. There's no more excuse. If the VC is to be taken at his word, then he will follow through and honor the statements he made. He will instruct the PPP commissioners on Gcom to pursue these systems. It can get done in time for the 2025 polls. We challenge the PPP. If they believe that they can win in free and fair elections, implement those things that the VC argued for. 1, a new voters list. 2, enhanced biometrics. 3, electronic voting. And let us head to the polls in 2025. Let the PPP back up their words with actions. No more hiding behind present electoral laws. Let us amend legislation that may be needed. The AFC will support appropriations for Gcom to capture biometrics and conduct electronic voting. We're throwing down the gauntlet. Time for the PPP to stand by its statements. Support the implementation of changes you advocated for, and let us head to the polls, and we will see who will win in free and fair elections. Mr. Canton, your statement.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here once again. My concern is the utterance, I think, yesterday by the Vice President Jagdeo concerning the cash grant. He said how we have to have a new app put in place before the cash grant could actually be shared. I'm very, very concerned about that move. That move is intentional in terms for the PPP to gather information about people in different communities. We already have the national database list in terms of the national registration list, with approximately 700,000 people is on top of that list. All we need to do is vet that list, remove all the dead people from the list and who's not supposed to be there, and use that same list as the guide and cutting checks for the people in the village. Every village have a list with the amount of people that live in that particular village. So all we need to do is check those people, check their homes, who live in those particular homes, and the check cut for that particular village. So you would not have the problem. Having the new, what they call app will create a lot of confusion. For people to go to the app and then to register for this grant, you have thousands and thousands of people may go in on the phone, they're watching TikTok, but they would not know how to apply for that grant. I hope it's not something like that. I would like to see that the national registration list be cleaned and we have people register. I am calling on the Guyanese people to go and get yourself registered, because as long as you're on that list is the easiest way to share out the grant across this country. I do not believe in the app. The app system will deprive thousands of people. People will have problems with it. So just like how everybody go in and vote when election time in the community, everybody will go and pick up the check right in the community and go and change it. But we have to have a proper list with the proper names, all the dead people we need to remove. We know fully well that people can go and pick up a check and change it. So I am telling the PPP government right now, don't worry with that up thing. Just fix the voters list, everybody names on that, and then cut the checks for the people.
Thank you, Mr. Carrington. We will now go down to Mr. Kemraj RANJATTAN for his statement.
Thank you very much. And I have a release on Gaisuko, something very topical. The AFC notes the recent pretended alarm which GAU has sounded over the below target sugar production of Gaisuko. Indeed, sugar produced thus far is less than 40% of the reduced target for 2024, that target being 100,000 tons. Gaisuko produced just 6,738 tons for the first crop out of a 37,000 tons target. And so far, 25,000 tons for the second crop with 2 months to go. This second crop was targeted to produce 63,000 tons. All the chatter which came from former PPP appointed CEO Sesnarayan Singh early this year that Gaisuko will realize increased sugar production in 2024 by expansion of acreage, retooling and mechanization was just poppycock and propaganda. When the PPP realized it was fooled, and even they realized that SACE had fooled them, it sent SACE Singh off to Brussels and then brought one of its loyalist activists, Mr. Chung, as the replacement. The sugar industry suffers fundamental problems which cannot be solved by replacing CEOs nor fooling Guyanese about expectations of the hollowest order. The loans taken for the Skeldon project, probably the worst ever investment since independence, and argued for by Bharat Jagdeo, no other than Bharat Jagdeo, is costing taxpayers $3.8 million US per year minimum. This burden will run at a minimum until 2033. Additionally, subventions to Gaisuco from the PPP government this year alone stands at $9.2 billion. Since the PPP's coming to office in 2020, an approximate sum of $43 billion has so far been inputted into that corporation. So the sweet talk of improvement in production was thus all hollow. The intent was to create great expectations for its support base and to perpetuate massive misspendings and corruption in the sector. The AFC repeats that sugar has been dying since Guyana lost her preferential prices to the European market when the WTO ruled that preferential prices violated open market competition rules. Our cost of production is and will be double the price we sell for. And the workforce is diminishing because the next generation wants nothing to do with this back-breaking work in a hotter climate. Forcing our young men and women into such a working condition will only result in, as we have argued before, intergenerational transmission of poverty. And to throw good monies into this unprofitable sector is bad economics. GAU's future as a union is under threat too. The union must be aware that mechanization, just like right sizing, will mean a reduction of its union dues. And so it will do everything to see its parent body, the PPP, pour subventions upon subventions to keep the industry in the scale it wants it. And by a similar logic, to keep GAU alive. What this means, that is, this threat to its financial existence, is that GAU cannot take a principled, prudent stance as to the future of the sugar sector. And so it will shed crocodile tears as it recently did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. RANJATTAN. We will now hear from the leader of the Alliance for Change, Mr. Nigel Hughes, on two issues.
Good afternoon, members of the press. Thank you very, very much, Beverly. I'm afraid it's going to be a little bit more than two issues.
All right.
I want to start off with a crisis in one of the most fundamental institutions in this country, which is the Guyana Police Force. I read recently that the PPP, through their General Secretary, Dr. Jagdeo, said that there's no real crisis in the Guyana Police Force because there's only one incident of a senior officer being charged with 40 charges with a promise of it going all the way to 241 charges. Just imagine if you were living in anything looking like a recognized democracy and your deputy commissioner or assistant commissioner was accused by the institution that he headed of 41 acts of criminal, 41 acts of criminality. That would be enough to raise a serious issue of crisis in the police force. But it doesn't stop there. This officer, who is accused of having huge sums of money, way beyond what he could have saved had he been collecting his salary, not only is the sum staggering, but the fact that the gifts that he received from his fellow police officers of equally senior standing were themselves substantial. We have evidence of people sending huge sums of money to the Commissioner of Police to pay for a funeral for an officer at one of the best hotels in the country. Now, if that does not create a crisis of confidence in the Ghana Police Force, I'm not sure what does. But it doesn't end there. You will recall that less than 100 yards away from the home of the President of Guyana, Mr. Fagundes was gunned down. The cameras that were used to record or would typically record what happens at that location were not working, coincidentally. And up to now, there hasn't been a single arrest of anyone. We had an interesting disclosure by a police officer who was involved in the investigation at the time. And since 2018, we have passed the Protected Disclosures Act, which is otherwise known as the Whistleblowing Act, and we have not operationalized it. That means there could be absolutely no serious intent, both by the government and the Guyana Police Force, to provide it with yet another weapon to fight corruption, which is whistleblowing. So when we hear that the People's Progressive Party, through their General Secretary, say that there's no crisis, there's more than a crisis. Because if you can have a crime of that magnitude, that close to the president's house, and 2 or 3 years after, not a single suspect is arrested. We have had significant disclosures by someone who was part of that investigation. It must mean that it is beyond the capacity of the Guyana Police Force to investigate several crimes, not only those in which they are the suspects, but those in which the security of the president of the day is challenged. And just in case you think that that is more than enough, you then have the report by the head of the Police Complaints Authority, couldn't be more than 2 weeks old, which completely assails the Guyana Police Force about the methodology by which it operates. So the list can go on, but I dare say to the citizens of this country that if you don't think we're at a crisis now, just think about this. God forbid, if your child got struck down by one of those donors of gifts to the Guyana Police Force, and the driver got arrested, and it turned out that the driver was a relative of one of those persons that donated a gift to the commissioner or the deputy commissioner, do you really believe that that investigation is, one, going to lead to substantial charges, and two, that those charges will actually face the real possibility of a conviction? I just leave that with you. And if at that level of traffic, before we go into anything else looking like narcotics, or we go into anything else looking like corruption, I believe you will have a crisis. The final point I want to make on the question of crisis in the Guyana Police Force is this. I know of only one industry, one single industry, that will allow anybody to accumulate the amount of money that is alleged to be in the account of senior police officers, or would allow them to be able to make gifts of that nature. I only know of one industry. I think you probably know of the same industry. And if all of these matters, whether individually or cumulatively, do not indicate to you that we have a Guyana Police Force that is in crisis, then I'm not sure how far this has to go. You must remember that once the water starts to drip through a crack, it's only a matter of time before that wall is eroded and the entire contents of the tank remove the wall, or in the case of a hydropower dam, and destroy everything in its path. And I urge the citizens of Guyana to think about where we are. The second issue I want to talk about is the statement I read today in the Stabroek News, in which the Vice President of the People's Progressive Party again said that there's no need for a statutory framework for cash grants. Just think about that. The leader of the governing party wants to be able to spend 60 billion plus with no statutory framework, no oversight, no ability for anybody who doesn't get the grant to complain, no structure that allows for people who are excluded to be able to complain about not getting the grant. We already have heard of awful stories of discrimination, allegations of discrimination, allegations that unless you are a party affiliate, you don't get grants. And in that context, you now want to say you want absolutely no statutory framework. And then you go on to say stuff like this will cause long-term fiscal difficulties. Well, let me just perhaps put this in context so we fully understand. The position of the Alliance for Change is and has always been that the disbursement of cash grants to the citizens or parts of the citizenry of Guyana must be governed by a legislative framework that doesn't fix the number, i.e. 100,000, 5,000 US, does not fix the number that any citizen or part of the citizenry should receive. We have said that there should be a commission of the best qualified economists to do a couple of things. First, they decide for it in any given fiscal year whether it is appropriate to, first of all, have a transfer of cash grants to the citizenry. Two, they will determine, based on the financial health of the country, the size of that cash grant. That way, we remove completely from the hands of the politicians, including the AFC, if and when they get into power, the discretionary power to pick and choose who they give the cash grants to. The cash grants are not the subject of some sort of political discourse or political discretion by the party of the day. This is the people's money, and therefore there must be a statutory framework that determines how it goes. Because otherwise, what you end up with is exactly what the PPP is, a party of political convenience. You have heard earlier where my good friend Beverly pointed to a clip where the General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party said very clearly, he wanted enhanced biometrics. He didn't even go to fingerprints. He said retina recognition. Now, how do you move from that to today saying, oh, I have full confidence in the list? Nothing other than political convenience. And if you want a more contemporary example, the General Secretary of the same People's Progressive Party in July, when we said that the cash grant should be based on a formula that should be set in a statutory framework, said that that was a preposterous recommendation. He said it was preposterous. Matter of fact, he got personal. Nigel Hughes, I know we're talking about all sorts of attacks. And then we come to the president of the country in the National Assembly at his campaign launch, saying that all of a sudden it had become relevant, necessary, and appropriate. Do you want a greater example of political convenience? And that is precisely the reason why you need a statutory framework, because of course, whoever is in government at the time when they have to make a decision about cash grants, they are going to do what every political party does, which is they're going to attempt to bribe and pay the electorate to vote for them. We are a far more responsible people than this. We have had more than 60 years of this sort of political chicanery, and we know that the only way that you can fight this level of clear, blatant political biasness is by putting it in a statutory framework. If the people who come to distribute decide they're not giving to this street because they don't have supporters of the government of the day, the people of the street have a statutory right to go and object. They can file a complaint. That complaint has to be heard, and an independent body will determine whether or not they are eligible for it, not the politicians. And for too long, we have been in the position we are in because we have given the politicians absolute power to dispose of our rights. The final point I wanted to speak about today was, sorry, let me remind the good General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party, talking about recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure is really a smoke screen. If you set up the statutory authority and you vest the decision to determine what should be distributed in qualified economists who are independent, or a panel which has representatives from civil society, the political parties, and the Ministry of Finance, once you don't stack that commission, you will get the best advice. Not the political advice, you will get the best advice. The final point I wanted to talk about today was the letter to the editor by the commissioners of Gcom. Whatever your views are on Gcom, Gcom is constituted of 7 commissioners who speak on behalf of the commission, which is vested with the statutory authority to manage elections in this country. Sadly, we have a long history of the poor management of elections in this country, and I'm unaware of a single election that has not been challenged by some political party or the other. After 60 years of independence, and after 1992, we should at least by now have worked out a system which will deliver fair, credible results acceptable to all political parties, not acceptable to one or the other. And if we as a country cannot arrive at a position where our institutions can deliver results which are broadly accepted, we are in a difficult place. Because if we cannot even manage the process by which we identify those who will govern us for the next cycle, then it means that we are always going to be in a state of perpetual crisis. And worse than that, if we continue to have results that are not accepted across the board, we will create, unfortunately, the incentives for substantial parts of this country to disrupt the good governance of the country over the cycle of elections. They will have no trust, no confidence, and therefore their conduct may well be incentivized towards other acts of disruption. I just merely wish to go back to when the good leader of the opposition in the 1970s, Dr. Cheddi Jagan, was alive. You had several incidents of burning of sugar. You had several incidents of sabotage. And at the time, the government of the day said that this was based on an attempt to derail the economy. So whenever you choose to pick your era, you cannot have parts of this country that don't accept the results. Now, the commissioners, 3 out of 7, 3 commissioners complained about the hiring process that Gcom was undertaking. And I dare say again, my good friend Beverly this afternoon played a clip in the words of the current General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party, specifically saying that he had a difficulty with the hiring process of Gcom under the chairmanship of Dr. Serge Valley. So this just demonstrates that whether you are in government, out of government, Gcom has had a perpetual problem and has never at any stage had the confidence of the population in relation to their operations. It is the same General Secretary who in that clip that you heard spoke about fair systems, spoke about enhanced biometrics. Now, I would have thought, as we now have the wealth that we have, and we are aspiring to become a modern democratic society, that the least we could do is, since the General Secretary said so 15 years ago, or however long it was, and we are saying so now, we want enhanced biometrics, we want a new list, we want fair systems of hiring, then let us get together and identify the process, since all of us have made this allegation at some stage, that will give us enhanced biometrics, a fair system, and will give us a voting list which is acceptable to all parties. The alternative is very clear. If we go into an election in which there are grave doubts about the list, grave doubts about the verification of the voters, we are laying the foundation, for difficulties after the election. And I say to our international friends, the Americans, the British, the Canadians, the Europeans, the Caribbean states, and everybody else, that you issue a report after the 2020 disaster in which you said there should be a new list. We are saying here that whether you listen to us today or whether you listen to the current General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party on the recording, we need a credible election. You know from your experience in other parts of this world that where there are difficulties with lists, that you are beginning, you haven't begun, you're building the foundations, if you haven't constructed them already, for difficulties. And one of the additions that we would like to offer, that perhaps there need to be cameras, not in the voting booth, but in the polling station. So that when somebody says 100 people turned up and the camera shows that only 25 people turned up, then we have some credible independent evidence that says how many people turned up. So if the people coming into the polling station as recorded on those cameras is less than the number of people who have voted in the polling station, then we begin to have a crisis long before we count the votes. And since all of us are committed to finding an election that is properly run and consistent with international standards, then let's add to the list to make sure that it is even more credible. Let us make sure we have cameras out there so we can see how many people come in. So that when people declare that you got 100 people voting and the cameras only show that 25 people enter the polling station, that we have difficulties, and we can address that, because I'm not sure that many people would defend that. And I thank you. I might have gone on a little long, but I thank you for the indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Nigel Hughes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have raised a number of issues in our opening statements. And so now I invite you to ask your questions.
Looks like it's a good week. No questions? Sorry, who?
Hi, good
Kaichor
afternoon.
News, we have a question. Sorry.
We have a question from Kaichor News. Please go right ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my question is, recently...
Can you please identify yourself?
Sorry, Anna Williams, Kaichor News. Good afternoon, everyone. Recently at his recent press conference, the Vice President Jagdeo basically shut down the idea of having a referendum voted on by Ghanaian citizens at the 2025 elections on the renegotiation of the oil contract with ExxonMobil, saying that having a referendum on the ballot paper will complicate the voting process. And he believes that parties should come with their manifestos and let the people choose who will be in government, and then they can go from there. How does the party view this?
I noticed we have David Patterson, who's our point person on oil and gas online. So I don't know if, David, you want to reply? David, are you there? Are you hearing us?
Sorry. So, are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Yes,
we are.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Williams. Look, the question of we have, as you know, Nigel is part of, and we are part of a constitutional committee, a constitutional reform committee, and we obviously would do believe it, though, that at some point in time there needs to be to amend our constitution, a general referendum on the contents of the constitutional amendment. Maybe it'd be a good idea to include not only the recommendations from that constitutional committee. Maybe it would be a good idea to include other issues which we do think are necessary. Not only the oil and gas, I mean, there's the issue of death penalty, of course, which I feel strongly about, in the sense that it's something that should not be on our books. But there are several other issues I do think that if the PPP, as we are very confident or very would like constitutional reform, change, and those things like that, that we can have one referendum to change all these things before the elections. It's only a question of a will. You know, we would like to have certain clauses in our constitution change, and we would support a referendum to do all of those things, including matters of oil and gas on our referendum prior to any election.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. We now have a question from Tammy Garrett. Go ahead. Tam, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, good afternoon. I can hear you. My question is pertaining to the voters list. I know that there's a lot of calls that there needs to be a new voters list. But what I don't see a lot of conversation around is the process and procedures and how exactly we are supposed to go about getting this new voters list. I would be glad if Mr. Hughes could touch on exactly how we should go about, not without circumventing any existing statutes that are there. How do we go about getting this new voters list that we keep advocating for?
Okay, the good thing about our party is that we have executive members that are dedicated to various areas, and Gcom is actually the area of Mr. Patterson, and I will invite him to address that. Forgive me, whatever he says, he says on behalf of the party.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Miss Garnett. The ruling which everyone is relying on says, that is from the Chief Justice, that you cannot remove someone from the list because of residency. It does not preclude you from doing a new house-to-house registration, which ascertains how many persons are resident in Guyana of voting age or 14. When we do registration, we do 14 and above, from which Gcom then extracts the name. This was done in 2008. If you can recall, if you do some research, Ms. Garnett, in 2006 election, there was a big call, no verification, no election, that was done by PNC and AGDA and several other agencies. And exactly as position as we are in now, with the help of the ABCE countries, a new house-to-house list was produced. That new house-to-house list was completed in 2008. It started 2008, it probably completed sometime closely after. And that had a base list of every single eligible voter in Guyana. And like from then on, what happens if anybody else comes in and would like to be included, if you live overseas and you can come and you can be applied to be on the list. But basically what we would have, obviously, if you were deceased or are no longer interested in Guyana, you wouldn't apply to be on the list. So there's nothing precluding us from doing a house-to-house. We're not removing anybody. We're starting a register at the base of all eligible persons that should be on it, and then it is populated like it's done all the time. Same claims and objections, continuous registration, etc. So the question, people keep dodging the fundamental parts of what we're saying. Well, almost everyone is saying we're not trying to remove anybody. We're trying to start off from a credible position whereby you record each and every voter. And finally, I'd like to say this: in 2019, in 2019, for those who think it's not possible, when in August of 2019, at the time of the Chief Justice ruling, Gcom were somewhere between 85 to 90% completed a new house-to-house registration. And then, of course, it was halted after the Chief Justice ruled by none other than the chairperson, Ms. Claudette Singh. That process was. And then, of course, what we had is a combination of what the new data that was collected and the old list. So we're not trying to reinvent the rules, circumvent any laws. And even if there's any laws, we're willing to go to court. It's not a constitutional law. So all it needs is a simple majority.
And if I may add to that, David, is that during that process, we also capture fingerprints, we capture biometrics. So it's not a separate process, it's not an additional detail. So it's done at that time.
You're absolutely correct, Beverly. Everyone knows that at registration, you give all 5 fingers, and it's placed on a on the old single white piece of paper, your thumb and your 4 fingers. And Gcom has that. And Gcom has claimed and continue to claim that they cross-match these fingerprints with their existing database to see if there's any duplication. We're saying that this is the 21st century. We are an oil-producing nation. We're one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and all the great accolades we are. It's time to move away from that paper-based system and do it like everyone else. Previously, when you went to the bank, you used to have a little bank book they used to write on. Then it's now all is done electronically, you know what I mean? And there's no mystery in it. You know, you've lost no money in the transaction from the bank to this new process. So all is simply needed is Gcom to scan the existing, to digitize the existing fingerprints, see which are usable and which are not. If the ones that are not usable, they can simply go and recollect if the person is still alive and around, and then move forward from there. Let's move forward. It's a simple process. And the question of finance should not be a problem. I'm sure that even if we can't afford it, which we can, there's several international agencies that will willingly assist us for free to get out this process correct.
Thank you, Mr. Pat. Sorry,
If I could follow up for clarification, because Mr. Patterson, if I'm correct, you're trying to say are you saying you should scrap the NRR, the existing NRR, and try to create a new NRR that we will extract the electors list from?
A new household registration process will give you a new NRR, and that could be accomplished in 6 months.
Okay, fair enough. But for example, a hypothetical situation, someone is not at their residence when the house to house is being conducted, or they're not in the country at that point in time. A new NRR gets created without you on the list. And I understand there can be claims and objections, but does that not still disenfranchise persons if you're going to scrap that list, and then persons are not having opportunity to be able to get onto the new list?
Why would they have an opportunity to get onto the new list? If
you scrap the old list, does that not still indicate that my name is removed from the list and cannot be added back to the list until the house to house, or until whenever I'm able to go into Gcom and get my name back on the list? Does that not still constitute removing a person's name from the list, and does that not still clash with the ruling?
No, my dear. Sorry, I disagree with you, madam, because right now, if you are overseas and you come back and there's a claims and objection process going on, you can be included. You know what I mean? It's if you're not around when the claims and objection period of the house is done, when you return, you get on the list. That's how it's done every election, even with the existing list. Prior, just about, I think, sometime like about 2 months before election, the list is open for persons to get on the list if you are not available.
But
so
again,
I don't see why you can't.
With the ruling, does that still not constitute removing
We're not
my
taking
name
anybody off
from
a
the
list.
list?
You're creating a new list. You're not taking anybody off a list.
Exactly. But then if you create a new list, that still equates to me being removed from the list, does it not?
Well,
if
no,
I'm not
not,
home when the registration is done, am I not still removed from the list? If you create a new list, you do house to house, I am not at home. Is that not still removing my name?
No, my dear, let's take your conversation to a logical conclusion. Your suggestion logical. 2040 elections. Do you imagine the size of that list? If you take your argument to a logical conclusion that anybody that ever was on the list, irrespective of whatever has transpired in the next 15 years, name will still be there. That's a logical conclusion to you trying to get at. Is that a logical suggestion? I doubt so. I doubt it. Guyana, and let me put it this way. I mean, and there are a lot of proponents about this argument being put forward that you are. Guyana is the only country, probably in the Caribbean, Commonwealth or elsewhere, where the voters list is larger or equates to the population list. For example, Jamaica has an equally large migrant population as that is Guyana. You mean, if not more, because there are more Jamaicans than Guyanese in there. And they don't have this problem. So I don't see how come we are trying to make an illogical argument that, you know, I mean, that once your name is on, it should be there on until you die. As a logical situation, you know what I mean? There must be mechanisms to bring this under control because right now it's an absurdity.
Look, I want to make an input here and to say that we are not going to, because of the existing law, that you can't remove people from the list. We could understand that. So there can be a collision course, and that is what I think she fears. But listen to me. If the present list has 750,000 people as voters because of all, it was so old in 2018, what we are saying to verify what should be the voters list, we are not going to exclude anybody from that present list that has that huge amount of people. All we are going to do, and we could do it because we are sensible people, is to state that the house-to-house registration found out that these blue-colored names are the names that are existing 18 years and above in Guyana. And so you can have your 800,000 names list, but 460,000 will be in probably a different color or a column that says something that they were the persons who we found when we went out house to house to find out the people. And so we can resolve that problem, but we don't exclude anybody names. So you know who is in the 800 list, but not green colored as a regular voter, you can still come and vote if you're there on that day for the elections. So there can be methods, but it's the will. The PPP does not want to do that. It seems that Gcom does not want to do that. Because you're not excluding anybody from this large amount of names. You are now only putting in, after a house-to-house registration, that these were the persons found. And so we could solve the problem.
Cameron, thank you for mentioning that, Beverly. Sorry. I also wanted to mention a proposal which we put to Gcom and which we continue to put to them. They can do a sampling. They can say very, very easily, instead of doing they could say they will go and physically verify voters over 75 years of age as a coordinate, and they have all those information. So if they pull the database and they see that there are 3,000 voters over 75 age, they can send somebody there to just go and check and see how many of them are still alive or how many, and that quite easily can resolve some of these issues. Just sample the database and let us not, and Kamal is right.
Yeah, Cordell Jones from Livewire News. First of all, I'd like to jump to Mr. Patterson. You spoke about 2019 just now. Whilst you were minister during a site inspection in March of 2019, you expressed confidence in the 110 million bridge that was to last for 40 years or more, calling it a perfect example of quality infrastructure for communities. How do you respond to concerns that have emerged only 4.5 years after that residents are saying the bridge is sinking and there's the structural integrity of the bridge is going? Could you elaborate on the measures taken at the time to ensure the bridge's longevity and how these issues might have arisen despite your assurances to the people in the community? Usually I'm muted after this, so I'd like to get all the questions out.
Hold a minute, please. Hold a minute, please.
No one ever mutes you.
Let us deal with the issues raised at the press conference. And then you come.
Just 1
Which
minute.
bridge is he referring to? I assume he's talking about
David?
The one in
David.
Maruka, sir. I have a question.
The one
for
in
Mr. Hughes
Maruka,
as well.
sir, there's nothing wrong with the bridge. We actually.
Sorry. Sorry, sir. Mr. Patterson will respond to you, but we do have a protocol here.
My apologies.
We do have a protocol. We do have a protocol here, and the person who is managing the press conference will identify who will ask the next question. So I did notice that you jumped in without that invitation. We don't have a difficulty answering the question. I will invite Mr. Patterson to respond, but I do.
Well, I was muted the last time, Mr. Hughes, so
Sir,
I didn't know that.
Sir, all I'm asking for is that at least we have some sort of order in which we operate. We are not trying to shut anyone out, but I don't think you are going to force our agenda. We will invite you to answer. And like I indicated to you, just to demonstrate that we don't have a difficulty answering the question, I will allow Mr. Patterson to respond to it. But there are people in the queue, and I would prefer if we follow the rules that we've established. That's all I wish to say. David, you can proceed to answer the question.
Right. Thank you very much, Nigel. Thank you very much for the question. I'm assuming he's talking to the bridge at Maruka. There's absolutely no truth to the bridge is sinking. What it is the question is the approach. I know that your news agency would like to think, but further than that, we took two of the most eminent bridge engineers to do an independent study of that bridge. That is the late, what's his name, Joseph Holder. And if you can go online, Mr. I can't remember your name. If you can go online and just do some research rather than being Mr. Joseph Holder, who you know is the father of the Demerara Harbor Bridge. He did it. And there's Mr. Bert Carter, who I still think is wrong, and they did an independent survey of the bridge. What you're talking about is the bridge approach, which is the responsibility of the community, or even the ministry if they're willing to assist. We were, and that is, and the bridge approach is what is being done through the weight of the trucks using it. Not a single issue has been found on the bridge. But you can do your research. You can contact Mr. Bert Carter. You can contact the ministry, I think, on the ministry, or even Google Joseph Holder's professional report on it. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. I see Tammy's hand is up again. Ms. Garnett?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, good afternoon again. I just wanted to do a follow-up. I have two more questions. A follow-up to what I had spoken about earlier about the voters list. Mr. Patterson had mentioned the numbers. Given that I know he's noted, the issue is that we say that Guyana has a small population and the voters list is not relative to that small population. But given that overseas-based Guyanese, there's nothing barring overseas-based Guyanese from voting, coming home to vote, since they're on the list. Shouldn't we, do you believe that we perhaps should expand what we consider to be the population to include the diaspora as well, given that they are eligible and can come home to vote, instead of just saying it's just the adults that are in Guyana, and that is why the voters list is so big? If we include the adults as well that are
Nigerians will answer that question.
Sorry.
I think Nigeria
Can I give my second question as well?
Well, let's go one at a time if you don't mind.
Okay, certainly.
We probably a little slow here. You will recall that overseas voting was a big problem. There were very many allegations by this present government when they were in opposition against overseas voting. And overseas voting is now illegal. So I'm not sure what you're suggesting, whether you're saying that people overseas should now vote, because the law is that there's no overseas voting permitted.
I'm talking about overseas-based Guyanese that come home to vote. Are you saying that is not permitted?
No, I'm not saying that overseas voters can't come home to vote. If they're registered, of course they can come home to vote.
Well, that is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about any kind of overseas voting.
But madam, just allow me, please. Madam, I think we clearly don't share the same opinion. Mr. Patterson has tried repeatedly to identify what our position is, and it is obvious after several of his responses to you that you are reluctant to accept them. That doesn't change our position. Our position remains as articulated by Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Is there
moving on to my
question on another topic, Ms. Garnett? We will come back to you for that question. We have a question in-house.
I don't know if you want to come closer so that your colleagues can hear your question, so that they may have the benefit of the question, so that they can report accurately.
Two questions coming from Ghana Chronicle.
On the as we're on the topic of elections, so recently Dominic Gaskin had said that the opposition.
Come up to this, Jude.
No, we're not inviting you to be in the camera. We just asked you to closest.
We can record it.
Yes. Recently, Dominic Gaskin had said that the opposition needs to prove that it's willing to accept the will of the people before even attempting to effectively contest the next elections. Is this something that the party is willing to do? That's my first question as we're on the topic of elections. And the second one, Mr. Hughes, in light of your advocacy for free and fair elections, do you think it's imperative that the electoral fraud trial is to be completed in a timely manner, seeing that it has had several delays so far?
I welcome both questions. First of all, Mr. Gaskin is clearly entitled to his opinion, and we would respect, and we do respect the fact that he has offered his opinion on the next election. I know of several people in history who have been confident of certain results that have been completely embarrassed. And I'm not saying that Mr. Gaskin will necessarily be in that category, but we have a strong suspicion that he might be. And so insofar as Mr. Gaskin wants to express his opinion, he is free to do so. We don't agree with his analysis, and certainly our own independent research has led us to a different conclusion. In relation to the conduct of the criminal trial against persons accused of interfering in the last electoral process, I'm afraid I don't see the relationship between the conduct of that trial and a free and fair election. A free and fair election, as you know, is the responsibility of Gcom to deliver processes that provide a credible result. Whether people previously interfered, attempted to interfere, or people are of the opinion that people attempted to interfere, that has nothing to do with the present capacity of Gcom to hold a free and fair election. As we've indicated earlier today, we have grave reservations about the process, and we've echoed a lot of the reservations that the General Secretary of the PPP articulated so wonderfully 15 years ago. And we just want to say to you that, you know, those same concerns he had, we have today, which means that those concerns have persisted for a long time. And none of this has anything to do with the criminal trial.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. We will go back to Ms. Garnett for her question on a separate issue. And then we will.
My hand was raised for some time. This is what I'm saying. I'm being silenced. I can't get to ask.
We'll go to Ms. Garnett for her question. And then we will come to Mr. Jones and his question.
I passed to
Garnett,
Mr. Jones.
please
I
go
have
right
something
ahead.
else I need to go to. I passed to Mr. Jones. He can go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Garnett, for being so courteous. Mr. Jones, go right ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Hughes, I'll start with you. Have you had an opportunity, and this is off of the press conference, have you had an opportunity to view copies of the SOPs from the APNU AFC coalition's victory at the 2020 March 2nd elections, as many of your colleagues alluded to at the time? My second question is the AFC prepared to apologize for the role it played, by some of its senior members in the 5-month attempt to deny the will of the electorate following those elections? And finally, you spoke of persons being disappointed after expressing an opinion. During the 2020 elections, the coalition would have expressed an opinion that they won. Could you be talking about the coalition in the statement that you were just making?
You're very kind for those questions. I will
Thank you.
address them one by one. At the last election, I was not in the business of examining SOPs. If you are alluding to my position as counsel for some of the persons who have been charged with electoral offenses, I certainly will not disclose the contents of their instructions to me, and I don't think you can seriously ask any lawyer in the country to disclose the contents of confidential information they may have received. And you may wish to classify that as conflict or whatever you want to call it, but I believe the professional obligation is that whatever your client says to you or provides to you is in confidence. So on either front, I am not going to answer that question. I think that was your first or second question. Your second question was
Apologize for the
whether the Alliance for Change will apologize. I'm not sure apologize for what. If you're talking about the role in the elections, I would ask you to identify to me specifically what it is you're saying that the Alliance for Change did in the elections for which you're seeking an apology. I can't answer.
Okay, can I give you an example, sir?
Sir, if you'll allow me, I am not trying to shut you
Let me
out.
ask for an example, so I was just
No, no,
offering so you could give the
yeah,
explanation.
but I'm sure both of us come from the same place, and the normal standard courtesy is that, you know, I will wait for you to finish, and hopefully you will reciprocate. So yes, I'm listening. Go ahead. You're going to provide examples. You vanished. Mr. Jones, I think your name is. I am waiting for your question.
Oh, sorry about that. I was muted. So the former Minister of National Security.
Forgive me for my impertinence. That we didn't mute you, right? You muted yourself.
Oh, okay.
I just want to be sure
So-
because I don't want the articles that come out and live in Guyana that we muted you. Yeah.
I don't report for Live in Guyana, so I don't know what you're talking about. This is Livewire News Agency, sir.
Oh, sorry, Livewire.
So as I was saying, the example of what maybe the AFC should apologize for, the former Minister of National Security, I think he's on this press conference, and the former Minister of Telecommunication, who I think you were aware of, would have came to the Guyanese public and spoke about some Russians who they had found and had something to do, according to them, with the rigging of elections or something to do with that. It was reported by the former Minister of National Security that these persons were deported. Do you think that they should have done more as persons charged with the responsibility, one security, one telecommunications, do more since these persons tried to subvert democracy in Guyana? Shouldn't they apologize for that?
Well, sir, again, you know, I'm a little perplexed by your questions. First, you asked me if the Alliance for Change should apologize for actions during the last election. You volunteered an example is that there were Russians who were found, and you have confirmed that they were deported. Now you're asking me whether the government or the Minister of National Security should have done more. So clearly, if they were deported, there's nothing for the Alliance for Change to apologize for. Because if two persons were found and they were Russian in nationality and they were found with equipment and they were deported, I'm not sure what else you wanted done. The fact is they were removed and the Minister of National Security, in the exercise of his discretion with the responsibility for security of Guyana, removed them from the country rather than put them through the necessity of going to court, simply because that might not have been the most effective means of dealing with it. Now, if you're asking me whether the decision to deport them rather than have them charged is a decision for which we should apologize, I beg to differ. I don't think there's anything there to apologize. So that is my response to your question.
Mr. Jones, you had a turn.
I beg your pardon, sir?
Yeah, I was, Mr. Hughes, just before I move on, in relation to your response just now, there has been no photograph, there has been no sort of evidence that these Russians actually exist or they were actually deported. The Guyanese people were just given a press conference. We didn't see a statement from the police. We didn't see any documents that they were on so and so flight, this name, that name, Russian nationality. We saw no passports. So based on that, you know, that is where I was coming.
Just a minute. I am affording you an opportunity to speak to the former minister, and he will address it.
Sure.
Please. There were 4 Russians who were speaking to Bharat Jagdeo in Russian at the hotel, Marriott Hotel. And based on what the police and the special branch indicated, that they were speaking certain things that they rather suspect had to do with the elections. They then came to me with a report, and the report is now in the hands of Mr. Ben. It is there, the permanent secretary has it. The 4 named persons, where they came from, and all of that by Mr. Leslie James. And they indicated that these persons might be doing certain things suspicious. I asked the question, what you think it was suspicious about them? Well, they said whatever they said, and these are all what you call national security issues. I indicated, well, whatever it is, it's going to be very hard to prove and all of that. Please deport them if they are illegally in Guyana, because the report came to me that they are illegally in Guyana. The 4 names were made public at that meeting that myself and Kathy had in relation to this incident. It is very well known. So don't tell me that I didn't deport 4 Russians. They were caught talking to Jagdeo in suspicions in relation to the elections. I could not have gotten what they were talking about. And so I decided, look. If you don't have that, the police from Special Branch and all of that, send them people away. And they were sent away. I have the names in a report that I can still find in my library, and their names are all there. I will try to see if it was in my telephone, but they were indeed, and their photographs are there. 2 of them were staying at the Marriott Hotel, and 2 were staying somewhere at another hotel. And these are living people. Okay, so don't give the impression that we make up story.
Mr. Jones, you have any other questions? Lest we be
Cameron,
accused
just to say it out, just like with the previous statement on the bridge, simple research. I'm here on my computer and I just pull it up. The report with photos and everything like that. I think Mr. Jones just simply did not want to do the research before he came to the conference. But it's his prior prerogative.
So, Mr. Jones, we're on the verge of wrapping up, and we wouldn't want to be accused of excluding you. Is there anything else that you wanted to ask us?
No, Mr. Hughes, thank you for facilitating me and thank you for responding to the questions.
And I thank you, sir, for being a true journalist.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, that brings us to the end of this press conference for November 1, 2024. Of course, always feel free to email us. Many of you have our contact numbers, so you can also send us any other questions you may have. Once again, thank you for joining us.
Good.